What up, everybody? We are here. And let me go ahead and bring Mike back up real quick. Hey, Mike. It's good to see you. Uh-oh, I can't hear you now. Is your microphone muted on your side?
I don't think so.
Oh,
Can you hear me?
There we go. It was my speaker. There we go. So sorry, my bad. But yeah, sorry guys, we were a minute late there. Free is already in the comments giving us crap because he is more late than me normally. But we had a little technical hiccup. We had some internet problems.
Yeah, you got to tell your audience this was on me, not on you. We've got a really bad storm here in eastern Virginia. I live out in the middle of nowhere, and I've got a cable line, that I paid for to come up my stupid driveway. But apparently the connection getting to my driveway is an issue when we have a bad storm.
Yeah. Well, that's no fun. But no, Free's still gonna blame me for it no matter what. That's just what he does. It is what
well,
it is.
It's your fault for having a guest on who lives in the middle of nowhere with the storm. So it is your fault on some level.
There we go. Yeah, we'll take that. But guys, share this out. We have a great show in order. We're gonna go over some things. We're gonna talk about some stuff. We're going to talk about how we're going to make this country even better than what it is right now with some of the changes that Mike's involved in, and how we're going to really start making some drastic changes in politics and really drive the country back on track. That's going to be a majority of the show today, but we do have to touch on the document that everybody talked about on Sunday night that said it was fake, but turns out it's not fake. And so everybody's having to recraft it.
Casey, if I can just jump in, there is an acid test as to whether it's fake. Okay. There is an acid test, just for the benefit of your audience. Is your name or mine on the document? Are we listed in the document?
No.
Okay, it's probably fake. It's probably
but yeah, so we're going to touch on a lot of that. But Mike, go ahead and give a brief introduction to everybody that's tuning in for the first time.
Oh, boy. I don't know that everyone wants 60 seconds on me. That would be the worst minute of their day, and of no use. If anyone really cares, they can go to ter.com. Look, I think most of your listeners know I spent a long time inside the Libertarian Party. Particularly, I spent 14 years in the Libertarian Party, since around the time I started my second career as a police officer, and worked with the party. I was on the ballot, of course, last year. And my campaign team, not everybody, a bunch of folks from my campaign team and some other libertarians have moved over to the GOP, specifically to the Republican Liberty Caucus, along with a bunch of Republican friends. And it is our job now to build up the Republican Liberty Caucus. For those who don't know, the caucus, the RLC, is a caucus that was initiated by a bunch of libertarians who thought that it would be a good idea to see if they could foster libertarianism inside the Republican Party as opposed to working with the Libertarian Party. And this was back in around 91 or 92. I don't know if I have the year exactly right, but approximately some time ago, some 30 plus years ago. This is a caucus that was chaired by Ron Paul at one point, for example, and a lot of important libertarians have been members. The caucus had its heyday a few years ago. I think a lot of libertarians believed that Donald Trump was going to be someone who really leaned into his libertarian side. I think that's still an open debate as to how strong a side that Donald has that is libertarian. We can talk about that. And I think that took a little bit of the wind out of the sails of the libertarian movement inside of the Republican Party. But now there's going to be a battle inside the Republican Party to decide what the party looks like, how it behaves, what it does, what it's all about once the president leaves office. And that debate is going to happen whether we engage it or not. And our team believes that we therefore darn well better engage it.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm all for liberty. More we can bring liberty. But I got to call out Scientific's comment here on the screen. Every time a libertarian becomes a Republican, $1 trillion is added to the national debt. Do you agree with that, Mike? Do you
Yes,
agree with
that is true. And every time a Republican becomes a libertarian, $1 trillion is added to the debt. Every time I go to the bathroom, $1 trillion is added to the debt. Every time I back into a tree in my backyard, $1 trillion. Yeah, that's a thing that happens. $1 trillion gets added to the debt. I don't think it's because of those things, but
So it's
because
correlation, not causation, is what you're saying.
it's not causal. Well, and I don't have proof that it's not causal, right? I just don't think that it is. Look, it is true that the national debt is out of control. I think that's one of the reasons why we have a sense of urgency about this project. I think all projects with a glimmer of hope in terms of either advancing liberty or holding politicians to account in terms of what we call libertarianism, at the very least, an honor for free markets and the Constitution and fiscal conservatism. Any project with a glimmer of hope is worth supporting. And so for folks that want to stay inside the Libertarian Party, build that party back up, make that party as useful as possible, I'm all for it. And I think a lot of people who are inside the Libertarian Party know that I continue to support your efforts. But I also believe that it's worth taking a shot at straightening things out inside the Republican Party. What the probability is of success, I don't know. And partly that depends on your definition of success, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and that was actually going to be one of my questions, is like with you, and so we might as well just jump into it. Is like, let's go into that a little bit. What does success look like from your perspective with the RLC?
The objective, not just for the RLC, but the overall, the American objective needs to be at the moment keeping the federal government of the United States from financial collapse.
Okay.
I think that that's number one. That is a thing worth avoiding for a couple of different reasons. I don't think most libertarians and very few Republicans appreciate the significance of what it is that we're talking about. If the federal government collapses, this is not a nice orderly takedown, right? This is not like your neighbor goes bankrupt and we carefully auction off his house and his car and we pay off his debts. And, if he's got something left over, great. And if he doesn't, he goes and gets a job and, life moves on. No, that's not how this works. If the federal government collapses financially, it takes down the bond. It obviously takes down the bond market for treasuries right away. But that means that the private sector bond market collapses as well. And with it, it takes down the equities market, and that takes down the currencies market, especially for the US dollar. And that casts the whole world into a deep depression. And a depression like that, you don't come out of in the normal cycle. If I can characterize normal as, a couple of years of hard work and we get back on our feet. That's not how this works. If you don't have financial markets that are functioning correctly, you don't get out of that depression anytime soon. We're talking about an event that would set back economic development, in a really profound way, and probably for decades.
Yeah.
Just, holds us back in terms of, development of our species. I don't mean to sound melodramatic, but it's a big deal. Governments fall over this type of thing. And it's not that anyone would, miss the federal government of the United States. It's not like this is an organization that's adding value to your lives. That's not the point. The point is that it would throw the private sector all over the world into a depression. It means that every one of the billions of people who live on this planet would have their economic lives and therefore their political lives and their security and their safety and their health undermined just because of moronic decisions made by stupid people in Washington.
Yep.
And that is worth avoiding.
Facts.
And that's what it's all about. So the issue is, can we avoid that? Can you stave that off for enough time that the economy grows hard enough to put the government on a good footing, even though it's making moronic decisions?
Right.
That's a bit of a stretch. I think that you've got to cut spending deeply one way or another. You can't, tax your way out of this hole.
No.
And as we all know, taxation is counterproductive. So you've got to cut spending in the long run. The only way to reduce taxes in the long run is to cut spending, because all spending is theft in some sense. It is a dollar that is spent by the government that you can't spend. And so it is counterproductive and undermines our lives and results in taxes in the long run. So we need to cut spending. So I think the answer to your question is, if we can pressure politicians into spending less money, that's a win.
Right. Okay.
How do you do that? I think you've got to try to get as many liberty-minded, fiscally conservative politicians elected as possible. So that means endorsing the right people, possibly knocking on doors for people, possibly helping people raise some money. We're talking about, federal congressmen. Once in a while, there might be a Senate race worth jumping into and trying to help people. It means a lot of work at the state house level, where, a modestly sized organization like ours can possibly make a difference. And we would like to play a role in the presidential nomination process for the Republican Party. And what that looks like is unknowable at this point. We don't know who the folks are going to be who want to run.
Yep.
And so we don't know if it's a matter of jumping in behind Madam Wonderful or Mr. Wonderful. If Thomas Massey were going to run for president, I think that folks would rally around him. I don't think that that's likely, but I hold out hope as an example. And if there's not a Mr. or Miss Wonderful who jumps in, it's a matter of holding accountable the folks who do and pressuring them to talk about this issue so that they can be held accountable after the election.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And that's one of the things I was talking about in the prior elections prior to 2024. 2024 was the first time in a while that I remember on the debate stage that we actually talked about the debt and our spending. It disappeared for probably 3-4 presidential elections in there. And I'm like, where did it go? Like, how did we do this? Like, the money's not going down. It's getting worse, guys. And then here we are. We have our national debt, and our biggest bill that we're going to have to pay, our biggest payment, is going to be just to interest. And once we get to that point, I almost feel like right now it's a point of no return. Like, there's no fixing it right now. Let's just burn it all down. But there's got to be some way that we can start dialing this back. And so I 100% agree. We have to figure out and control this spending in this machine that thinks they have just unlimited money. Unlimited.
Yeah, you said something kind of interesting there, bringing up the issue of whether or not we're already past the point of no return. We might be past the point of good decision making. And by that I mean, if there's going to be decision making at all in the right direction, if there's going to be significant spending cuts, I fear that if it's not made pretty quick, let me make up a story. If, for example, it doesn't happen in the 28 cycle, let's say the first time we get a White House that really wants to make changes, or a Congress that really wants to make changes, is after the 32 election.
Okay.
At that point, the disaster might be so proximate chronologically, so much in your face, that the decisions that are made are sort of a panic style, right?
Well, And I'll be honest, like this is where I don't like either party, like the Republican Party and the Democrat Party. I feel like that's the disaster we're in right now. That's why I don't generally try to get involved too much with the Republican side and the Democrat side, because I'm like, why do I have to support this? Like this, they created this mess. Like we got to replace them. But that's where like Elon's talking about this American party and trying to create that. My thoughts with this American party, I welcome competition. I use capitalism as a perfect example in this. How do you get a better product? Have competition, because then
Yeah.
they're going to try to do it. And so trying to have political parties that have competition, I think
Yep.
will drive better candidates and drive better debates and better topics and open people's eyes. But the part that I would like your insight on is the American Party, but then people are trying to say that this party is going to disrupt the primaries in 2026 if Elon creates it. People really underestimate how hard it is to create a party and become relevant in an election that's not red or blue. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. And judging by his rhetoric, judging by what he says on his X platform, he doesn't have any appreciation for this whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
And so I love the idea of rooting for a third party, just like I root for the Libertarian Party.
Mm-hmm.
But Elon Musk in this realm is unsophisticated, even by third party standards, right?
Sure.
He really doesn't know what he's getting himself into. And I think that the Bobby Kennedy experience last year and the year before is instructive, because that was a team, that was a good team, a smart team with access to money, that was earnest and professional. They had a good candidate. A lot of folks would argue not a perfect candidate.
Sure.
I get that. I wouldn't argue that Bobby Kennedy is a perfect candidate, but he is charming and good looking and smart, and his name is Kennedy, and he had dozens of millions of dollars. So that could have been a lot worse.
Right.
And think about all the things about which he has been right, especially in the context of coming off of COVID. He's right about the medical establishment. He's right about the conflicts of interest, and in many cases, just abject corruption in the federal government, the overreach, the too much power in the government, the bad decision making. He's right to be skeptical about the vaccines themselves. He's right to point out the lack of research and the extent to which the research that has been done has been compromised. He's right about all of that. And he's charming and good looking. His name is Kennedy, and he's got dozens of millions of dollars. So, and he still couldn't do it.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
Well, okay. Elon Musk has the money, but he doesn't have the pedigree, the background, the success, the resume, the charm, the good looks. He doesn't have a body of work. He doesn't have an issue that puts him out in front. He doesn't have any of those assets that Kennedy had. He's
Agreed.
only got money and a tood.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that. But if Bobby Kennedy can't pull it off, you're telling me that Elon Musk can? I got to go. I don't think so.
Yeah. Well, and that's
for
the
him.
thing.
Don't get me wrong. I'm rooting for him, but I don't think so.
Right. And I feel very similar. Like I welcome it because I just want new choices. I do. And unfortunately, like when we talked about a month ago, and you were talking about we got to make some drastic changes, and I 100% agree with that. Like we got to do something new. We got to try doing something that we haven't done before, and try to right this ship by not repeating the same behavior. Let's do something different. And sometimes it might be a little crazy, but let's try it. And that's where new political parties come in, pushing caucuses. That's one of the things that I'm curious from your perspective with the RLC and pushing this now. Do you think caucuses are the way that we can take back control of corruption within politicians? You think that would be
that's a tall order. I hope so. I don't think it's a silver bullet. I don't think that you can say, well, now we've got a whole bunch of caucuses, and so we're not going to have corruption. That's asking a lot. You know, I do think that politician comes from a Greek word that means corrupt.
Right.
You know, it just it's almost in the DNA. Not quite. I mean, there are people, and I think the vast majority of people who go into politics, at least initially, mean well.
Sure.
I don't. By the way, I don't have proof of that. I don't have data on that, so I probably can't back that up. But I hope that virtually everyone who goes into politics, at least in the beginning, means well. I think that people get compromised along the way. I also think that you need to, or at least a lot of people believe, especially in the duopoly, that you have to do certain things that, you know, you're not all that proud of to get the money that you need to get elected and things like that. And so you end up compromising. So there's a soft corruption. You know, it's not all just taking bribes and killing people on a Saturday afternoon. It's a compromising of your values. And I think that the two-party system fosters that, because you've got to fit into a system that is not of your making, that almost by definition is not going to perfectly align with your principles, because there's only two of them. You know, the chances of any human being perfectly aligning with either one of only two parties, you know, that's just, it's not going to happen. So to your point, caucuses are another way of saying, well, I'm going to say something really optimistic, probably going to get some pushback here, but caucuses are a way of saying you've got more than two choices.
Okay.
Right. We're trying to say you've got the Liberty Caucus inside the Republican Party. You're going to have the Freedom Caucus. You're going to have everybody else, in addition to having the Democratic Party, which is going to have splinters as well.
Sure.
So, yeah, it's still a duopoly in terms of ballot access, but at least we're trying to give people a choice within the Republican sphere. And I think that there are a lot of people in the Republican Party who have very strong libertarian leanings, who have not wanted to get involved with the Libertarian Party because they didn't think that the LP had the juice to get ballot access and upend the system and all that, about which people have been correct. So we're testing how big a segment of the Republican Party that is. I don't have data on this. I can't tell you it's 58% or 28%,
Sure.
but it ain't zero.
No, and it's definitely not. The thing that's interesting, like caucuses, I think serve a very valuable purpose, but they also are not utilized in a good way. And so a lot of Americans don't even know about them in a lot of ways. And so they don't realize that, hey, there was this liberty-minded caucus that maybe I should look up and see who's involved in it. And maybe I should figure out who those people are and support them. There's not enough talk around those type of things. Like the Freedom Caucus was probably the biggest one that I heard talked about when the whole speaker thing went down and everybody was joking about Donald Trump potentially becoming a speaker.
Right, and when he was not yet president, in between his presidencies, right.
Right. And so Freedom Caucus got a lot of attention at that time. And I'm like, cool, well, we'll see what develops of that. Now the Freedom Caucus is falling apart. And so it's like, how do we keep this good momentum of something good going within a party that there is already a lot of doubt? How do you combat that being in the RLC? And you still have a lot of people questioning, is the right or the Republicans the right team to be voting for?
Is the Republican Party the right team?
Yeah.
I think that depends on the candidate. And a little bit of this analysis has to revolve around compared to what?
Yeah. Well, and that's one of my arguments. I've always was told by my parents growing up, we had to choose the lesser of two evils. We got to make sure we do this. We can't let the other side win. And it's like, how do we do that within the Republican Party and get the candidates the attention so those bad lesser of two evil candidates don't dominate?
Well, that's true. Now, if you really have two crappy candidates, I believe that, you know, voting for a libertarian or a member of the Libertarian Party, I mean, or someone else, or write-in or some other party, or, you know, Bobby Kennedy or whatever, Elon Musk, is a good idea because it sends a signal. And I have always said, and I still believe, that you need to vote as a long-term investment, not a short-term investment. You need to vote your principles so that you send the signal about what type of a candidate you want to see in the future.
Okay.
That's very, very critical. I think most Americans do not think that way. I think most Americans vote short-term.
Yeah.
You know, that the next presidency is the only thing that matters, and we need to get the right person in. I thought the 2024 election was one of the least consequential in American history. I just, you know, the difference between Donald Trump at that point and Joe Biden, they're both going to spend more money. Neither one had demonstrated that they were going to keep us out of war. Neither one had demonstrated they were very much about free markets. You know, now we see that there are big differences, and I get all of that. Not all of it, would you say, is terrific?
Sure.
But it would be hard to argue that the Trump administration has not been very different from the Biden administration, right? that was a big difference. You know, that's one of those elections that matters a lot. But if you were to go back over the past 2 generations, if you were to go back, you know, since certainly since 92, I would say that the differences between the Republican Party and the Democratic Party have not been all that large. To your point, we used to talk about fiscal conservatism, but in the early 90s, when my boss's boss said, "Read my lips, no new taxes," and then in negotiation at Andrews Air Force Base, went back on that pledge and agreed to new taxes. That was, if not the end, the beginning of the end of the idea of the Republican Party being all about fiscal conservatism, and the Democratic Party is going to get marginalized. You know, Bill Clinton was the guy that balanced the budget for the first time in a long time, and then for the last time since. So it's hard for the Republican Party to argue that it's the party of fiscal conservatism at this point.
Sure. Well, and to use that date as a reference, back in 92, we were $4 trillion in debt. We just go to sleep and wake up in the morning and we're $4 trillion more in debt. Like, that's the way it feels like today versus 1992.
That was a lot of money back then.
Yeah. It's crazy on how it's evolved and so fast. Like, if we just look at how quickly we're adding to it today, and that's what scares me a lot. And that's where really Ron Paul caught my attention early on, is he was screaming about this stuff. And I had my Republican family telling me, "Oh yeah, we need to vote Republicans. And then as soon as I could register to vote, I registered as unaffiliated. And I'm like, I don't think this is the solution, guys. It's just not."
No, agreed. You have a question that I didn't quite pick up on perfectly, but someone's asking.
Which one, Chris?
Yeah, the certain amount of spending, they're not as linked as some people would lead you to believe. The Fed can control, if I can speak in the Fed's behalf, this will be a weird moment. If I can speak in the Fed's behalf just for a moment, the Fed can control money supply irrespective of the amount of money that the government spends. That is not to say that there is not a risk of economic contraction when the government spends less money, because there's an adjustment that takes place. What screws up an economy is not the government spending less money. You know, we're not Keynesians. You know, we have lived that down. But what screws it up is when the government changes course, changes policy. So if the government were to, bam, stop spending so much money all of a sudden, there's going to be a disruption. No getting around that. That's one of the reasons why you don't want the government spending so much money, because when you stop, there is a disruption. And that's just one of those things that sucks. You know, there's no getting around that. But that is not an argument that, and therefore we need to keep the government spending more money. Eventually there's going to be a correction, and you want that to be as soon as possible.
Yep.
Both for the purpose of getting it behind you and so that it's not bigger than it absolutely needs to be. And there's ways to.
Looks like his storm kicked in a little bit. We'll give him a second. And cut out for a minute just a second ago. So I think this might be fast, guys.
You
Yep.
still there?
You're coming back. I can hear you now.
Okay,
You're
sorry
good.
about that.
No worries. Oh, let's. I got you back. Hang on one sec. There we go.
Sorry about that. The storm is waning now, so I'm optimistic that we're going to be okay here. But I got the basic point out, which is that the adjustment from the government spending too much money is a problem, and that needs to be managed carefully. But it's not an argument that suggests, and therefore the government needs to spend more money. To the point of the Fed controlling money supply, it is a challenge. Okay, it is a challenge. But the Fed can control money supply separately from how much the government spends. And so, the Fed doesn't need to just slam on the brakes in terms of money creation and toss a difficult recession at the same time. It's one of the reasons why I advocate limiting the Fed's monetary policy discretion. I think that the first step to getting rid of the Fed is to take away its discretionary authority over monetary policy so that it has to follow a rule instead of just willy-nilly.
Yeah.
And the rule would be to set money supply in order to target 0% inflation. And the way you do that is to set force policy by law. So the money supply can only go up by a certain percentage each year, and that target percentage would be some number that we pick to slightly mimic economic growth in real terms, like say 2% or something like that. It almost doesn't matter what the number is, as long as the number is locked in. The Fed doesn't have discretion.
Sure. Yeah, I would agree with that. It would be nice if we could put more, like, regulate the government more in this area, because right now they just have blank checks that they write just because they woke up on the wrong side of the bed that day, and it's getting really ridiculous. As
someone asked about DeFi, what's DeFi mean?
Yeah,
maybe I read that wrong. It disappeared.
Yeah, Free. What? I think we need to focus on using DeFi to speed up defunding the madness in DC. What do you think? Yeah, what is DeFi, Free? It'll take him about 25 seconds to respond.
Yeah, that's okay. I think I know what he means, but I don't want to mispresume. You do want to I believe that the only political path forward to cutting back spending in a significant way
decentralized finance
is an overall cap on federal spending, which is something I believe Congress would have a hard time agreeing to.
Sure.
But an easier time than agreeing to specific cuts.
Oh yeah. I could see that.
Is what I'm saying. Absolutely. You see where I'm going here.
Yep.
In other words, it changes the debate, and it changes the political liability for these people that, have no guts whatsoever. I think I was fascinated by the reasons why so many Republican senators were not on board, and members of the House of Representatives who are Republicans were not on board with the one big beautiful bill. It was because it didn't spend enough money. This was not a Thomas Massey problem. Good for Thomas, good for Rand Paul, right? Standing against the bills because they spent too much money. There weren't enough cuts, yada, 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 not fiscally responsible. We all get that. But then the media almost didn't get it. There were plenty of discussions I saw on the TV that made it seem like there were congressmen, there were members of the House and senators who were against the bill similarly. Sure. Everyone who was against Trump got lumped up in the same category. No, they were upset because the bill didn't spend enough money. These were Republicans who are upset about the cuts.
I only laugh and shake my head because I can't say I'm surprised. Like, they got to be able to take care of their special interests and make sure they have their donors for the next election that's coming up in a year and a half.
It's something. I mean, it's really something. So anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that I think the only way that you're going to get Congress to agree, by the way, I don't know how to get a president to agree. You've just got to elect someone whose hair is on fire about these issues. That's the only way. The only way to get Congress to agree is to an overall cap, so that the debate is, we have a financial collapse coming. We have to do something about it. That means we have to spend less money. If the haircut is across everything, then the haircut doesn't have to be as big, right?
Sure.
We're not going to take 20% out of this, and this. We're going to take 10% out of everything. That would be sort of the argument. And so maybe the political liability would be slightly muted, and the debate would feel different, right? Mm-hmm. Because the debate that we just went through, that the Republicans are going to get hammered for, is, well, you made cuts in Medicaid so that the billionaires can have their tax cut.
Yep.
I thought it was a really bad political move to give the tax cut at the same time. I mean, who doesn't love a tax cut? I get that. But to have it at the same time as the Medicaid cut is handing something to the Democrats that they're going to beat you over the head with come November. We all know that. How that goes, I think, is very difficult to predict. But an overall cap would change the debate. It would put it in the context of the big picture, and might get some Republicans to support it in a way that would otherwise be difficult.
Yeah, and I agree. You kind of just try to bring a different conversation to the floor that hasn't been had, right? Everybody's always used to being like, well, you agreed to insert mine, and then I'll agree we insert yours, or we'll pass your bill later. Like, that's a lot of how these negotiations and compromises go on. A lot of Americans don't realize that.
And to the point made by your viewer, Terry, who's terrific, by the way, makes the point that there's a lot of green new crap. I don't think crap is the word she used, but green new crap still, that's my word, not hers. Don't pin that on her. She probably used a worse word. I don't remember, but green new crap was still left in there from days gone by.
Sure.
And I find that fascinating that a Republican-controlled House and Senate couldn't extricate all. They went after some. I don't want to sound too honest and mean, but they didn't go after all of it, and that's a problem.
Well, and that's one of the things that I was so frustrated with this, is that the original House bill, I was much more pleased with than I was at the Senate version. The House bill, like, there was no cap on overtime limit. There was no cap on your tax on tips. It started just freeing things up, and I'm like, okay, fine. Like, I'll take this. And then the Senate's like, no, $25,000 deduction cap for your tax on tips, $12,500 on overtime. And it's like, what? No, like that is
like,
not.
Who are you trying to protect with a $25,000 cap on tips?
Nothing.
Like who is in your, like, is that the sword you're going to fall on? That's the hill you're going to die on? What is there, 3 people in your district who are making $30,000? They're not reporting it anyway, by the way. Settle down. I just don't understand that. I must be missing part of the story.
Right.
It just didn't make any sense to me.
Well, it's like, and I would be fine if there was a cap, if it was a reasonable, livable wage. If it was up there, I'd be like, okay, we could compromise on a cap if it's a livable wage. Let's say $70,000. Fine, I would move on that. But I would ultimately want no cap. Ultimately, I want no taxes in general. But we know we're not getting that, because we got to be able to fund this debt somehow.
Not in the next few years, we're not. Not with $100,000 per capita debt at the federal level alone. In response, your friend brought up decentralized finance. That is ultimately the way to go. no matter what you mean by decentralized finance, one of the reasons why this is, I'm sure not what he meant, but this is where I want to go with it just for a minute. One of the reasons why we want to push spending down to the states is so that, you know, if a state goes bankrupt, it's a much different animal
Sure.
than if the federal government. Not only because of the scale, but because states don't issue their own currency. No state's going to bring down the bond market, and
Mhm.
states can learn from each other.
Sure.
Right?
I agree with that.
People learned when we had a bankruptcy, not a we wouldn't call it a bankruptcy, but I want to say utility company, Washington Electric, I can't remember the name of it, back in the 80s, failed.
Okay.
And that caused a big stir. People learned from that, right? And that was a good thing. I don't mean it's a good thing. You know, a bunch of people lost money and people got stiffed and taxes had to be increased. I mean, there was a lot of bullshit that went with it too. I'm sorry about all that. But at least a lot of people learned their lesson.
Sure.
The federal government of the United States going under is not a lesson learner. It just,
No.
you know, the whole world gets taken down. And that's a problem. When Greece got into problem, when the government of the nation of Greece was unable to make payment, or just as they were about to be unable to make payments, and they got bailed out by the EU and particularly Germany, a lot of us in the economics profession thought, this will show how naive I am, in case anyone needs further proof. A lot of us thought, well, at least there's a silver lining. At least the world will learn, right?
Sure.
That if you run a socialist government and impose too much on your folks, and you've got, you know, these government guarantees for the pensions, which are all socialized, you know, you run all this crap, you're going to get into trouble. People will learn it doesn't work and correct course. None of that happened.
Mm-hmm.
People didn't learn.
Yep.
And that's a real shame.
Well, people learn in two ways. Well, mostly in
Washington
by
Public Power
force.
Supply. Someone, I can't
Yeah.
quite read the name, but thank you. Yes, it was called Whoops, as a matter of fact.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and that was funny because it became, you know, a metaphorical double entendre, right? Whoops, we went bankrupt, and whoops was sort of the kitschy
That's
name
funny.
for the acronym. Yeah, that was funny.
Out of for all of the other topics, so switching gears just slightly here, with the RLC, like money's a big thing to get our budgets under control. Are there other big topics that you see that RLC will be pushing for within the Republican Party to change?
I'm back. I just missed your question because I
Oh.
had lost connection. Can you hear me?
No worries. Yes, I can. I can hear you.
Okay, good.
So,
Sorry about that. You were asking what kinds of things the RLC will be pushing for?
yeah, outside of financial, getting our budgets under control and controlling our money supply, what are the next other items that will be coming out of the RLC that they're wanting to push for?
Yeah. For starters, I think it's important for us to realize that the number of issues can't be too large, right?
Sure.
When I list them, I list 5 basic ones. You know, medical freedom, adherence to the Constitution. We can talk about what that means. A less militaristic foreign policy, free markets, and fiscal conservatism. I think I got to 5. And I think even 5 is probably too many.
Sure.
But I can't figure out which one to throw overboard. In terms of free markets, I think most Republicans are there already. I don't think that that's a swing issue. I don't think there's too many Republicans who would argue, no, we actually need more regulation, or we need to hang on. Well, to your viewers' point, a lot of Republicans did keep in some of the green new crap. So maybe I'm wrong about that. It's not ubiquitous inside the Republican Party. But for the most part, most Republicans are on board with the idea of supporting free markets. And by that, we mean making sure that tariffs don't last as well, right? We recognize that the president believes in tariffs for negotiating purposes.
Sure.
And I think that a lot of us would agree that there are strategic interests that are sometimes served by tariffs as well. You don't want to be beholden to decisions made by the Chinese government, for example. If you should end up in some weird conflict and you can't get certain basic things, that would be a problem. So there are certain applications, certain reasons, but in the main, you don't want these tariffs to remain in place.
Right.
Except for a couple of strategic things. These have to be viewed as negotiating tools. So that's a lot of what we mean by free markets and medical freedom. We talked about that briefly, a lot of the Bobby Kennedy stuff, and just a lot of the stuff that goes along with medical freedom. I think of medical freedom as being fairly broad. This isn't just about vaccine research. Although it is in part
That's
about
a big
vaccines.
part, yeah.
That's a big part. So I don't mean to minimize that, but it's also about, does the government have the right to shut down your economy because it's squirrely about the spread of a virus or something like that.
Right.
There are broader implications, and of course we saw the worst, and we need to be very, very careful about that. The foreign policy matters. I think a lot of people inside the Republican Party are split, for example, on the president's bombing of Iran.
Sure. Yep.
And that's a tricky issue, but it's a good issue for libertarians inside the party, because it makes the point in a way that would be very difficult to make if it were not something popular. You really get to make your point with something popular more than when it's unpopular. In other words, if the bombing had gone badly, right? Or if it was just abjectly stupid, if it were just ill-conceived, ill-planned, it just turned out to be a completely moronic decision.
Yeah.
Complaining about it wouldn't have the same juice.
Sure. I can see that.
And so our complaint is not that the president made a bad decision. We can argue that round or square, but that it wasn't his decision to make when he made it.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't an emergency. And that's our overarching overall thematic complaint, is that the White House keeps pointing at things and calling them emergencies.
Yeah.
Well, you can't do that. And so even if you're a diehard pro-Trump, love the Donald no matter what, and a lot of our brothers and sisters are, and good for them, then you want the president's agenda to last, to stick.
Yep.
And he's getting horrific staff work in a way that undermines his own agenda in the long run.
Mm-hmm.
I wish that, if you're going to bomb the nuclear facilities in Iran, and I recognize that in all likelihood that day was coming, that you can't have a regime say it wants to bomb other nations, including your allies, and you're left wondering if you're next, right?
Sure.
Get a nuclear weapon. I get that. I'm all about the libertarian idea that we don't attack until we're attacked. But, common law, ancient British common law is that if someone postures and balls their fist, you don't have to wait for them to punch you in the nose in order to, defend yourself. And so that is a concept that I think we all need to be sensitive to, but that doesn't mean that that's where we were a couple of weeks ago when the president pulled the trigger. That this was a trigger that was for Congress to pull, and if Congress wasn't ready to pull it, then we should have been waiting. That's the point. And because
Agreed.
it was such a popular action, it gives us the opportunity to make that point in a way, complaining. My point is, complaining about the stupid stuff the Biden administration did doesn't have the same juice, because it wasn't a matter of the administration just, being unconstitutional or, or taking too much authority. It did all those things, but the decisions it was making were so bad that it was hard to make the constitutional argument.
Sure.
Because it was all wrapped up in just stupid decisions.
Right. Yeah, and I still am. I think we should have minded our own business with Iran. I understand. I don't have all of the information. He was privy to more. But I'm in Scott Horton's world. They didn't have a nuke. I wouldn't trust Iran to be able to build one. No. But if we were to take that same methodology that you're talking about, then why is North Korea still existing on this planet? Like that's the part that I see with this is, if that's what we're going after, we already know one country really wants these things and doesn't care about us. Now, you could argue he's a friend of Donald Trump at this point, with him being the only president to walk across that line and shake his hand. But I find it interesting that we made up this big boogeyman from the government and we made it into Iran, and that's why we had to go and take it out.
Well, of course. I mean, you're exactly right about this, and good for you for recognizing that, even though, you weren't like me watching this since the 70s. and the CIA's involvement. We have got so much government asset dedicated to convincing us to hate Iran that it's almost inevitable. And the other thing, there's an elephant in the room. We have intertwined our foreign policy with that of the government of Israel.
Oh, absolutely.
And we need to disentangle that. And I say that again as someone who, I've always considered myself pro-Israel. I've traveled Israel. I've sent my kids. I've traveled with my kids, including Palestinian territory. And I've sent my son to train in the area, been all over. And love Israel. And of course, people of faith have all kinds of reasons to feel that connectivity to the Holy Land. We have deep cultural connections between America and Israel. So, I get it, and they are an ally, and they are the democracy in that area, and they are the superpower in that area. There are all kinds of strategic reasons, cultural reasons to feel that connectivity. So I don't mean that we should be just completely separating ourselves socially, but they deserve an independent foreign policy, and so do we. If we have learned nothing over the past couple of generations, I wish we would at least learn that funding other nations' foreign policies doesn't work. You don't buy the influence you think you are buying. And Israel is an example of that. By the way, every other group and every other government in the area is also an example of how little our money has purchased.
Sure.
It's a complete disaster from the strategic American point of view. And I think that we need to do a much better job of not letting our foreign policies get entangled. And I believe that the Israeli people would agree with me. I don't know that everyone in Israel would agree with me today.
Not everybody.
But in the long run, mark my words, there will be a movement to not get entangled with the United States. One of the things the Israeli people will eventually vote against is a government that doesn't promise to have an independent foreign policy. I think the Israeli people are going to eventually recognize that all of this aid from the Americans has led to papering over of some strategic decisions that are not in the interest of the Israeli people.
Sure. And I agree with that. That's main reason why I don't want us involved in anything in the other countries is, say we sign a deal like what George Bush did with Ukraine, that we're going to be able to back them and all of that stuff, right? Say we did that. They get a corrupt politician in office and start going a whole different direction 20 years later, we're still committed to them. Like, now we got to undo that contract. We got to undo that paperwork, and it becomes a mess. And it's like, no,
Yep.
we are a free country. We should mind our own business. And then, yeah, we should probably go and back some people up when they get into those situations if we feel we should be in there. But other than that, we should be minding our own business. And I'm sure most countries want it the same way, because they don't want everybody up in their business either. Like,
yeah, the United States
into the Middle East and ruined it.
The United States government does not turn out to be a great partner in many of these situations.
Yeah, it's crazy. But yeah, and we're coming up on an hour. Do you still got like 20, 30 minutes to continue?
I got 19.
19? Okay.
I got 19 minutes.
I got a couple
By the
more
way,
questions.
I'm not that interesting. You'll be sick of me in 18.
I disagree with that. I like this conversation. I like where we're going with it.
Well, the conversation is worth it.
But with the RLC, like what would you say is the first big milestone that you want to see us cross with the RLC? Uh-oh. Looks like it cut out again real quick. Have him come back. It's going to take a second.
You can hear more. Mike,
there you go. You're back.
I can't see you. Sorry about that.
It's all good.
I was going to say that there are administrative.
There you go.
We are. There are administrative milestones as well as political ones. So administratively, we need to make sure we've got a chapter in every state.
Sure.
Right. That's just the blocking and tackling. That's not sexy stuff, but it's stuff that has to be done. It's one of those things that will make the caucus stronger and give the caucus a little bit more influence nationwide and in particular areas. So there's a lot of blocking and tackling that has to be done. We made our announcement 3 weeks ago.
Yep.
3.5 weeks ago. So it's been 20 some days, and we have 11 individuals appointed to coordinating the creation of new charters in 11 states. So that's good. And we're looking for many more. So if anyone is out there, hear my voice and wants to know whether their state has a chapter up and running, reach out to me. And if there's not one, maybe you can help us stand one up. And if there is one, I can tell you who to contact and how to get involved. So either way, reach out to me, mike@miketermaat.com. That's a big one administratively. And then politically, we want to be in the position of starting to make some endorsements and getting involved with a handful. I don't want to overpromise, but maybe getting involved in a handful of races by the midterms.
Okay.
So maybe some endorsements, potentially even in the primaries, but certainly get involved by the general by November. So that's what we'd like to do. And then immediately get ready right after that to play a role in the nomination process for POTUS. And again, we don't, without knowing exactly what that looks like.
All right. Yeah. And when we talked a little bit, when it comes down to it, are you looking for people to get involved across in all of these states? Everybody have to be a Republican, or how does that work?
You have to be a Republican in the sense that the caucus supports the Republican Party.
Mm-hmm.
It is not independent of the Republican Party. Legally speaking, do you have to join the Republican Party? No, you don't. But you are joining a caucus that supports the party. So not going to lie to you about that. You know, it's not outside of this isn't Libertarian Party B
Sure.
or LP light or LP heavy or anything else. It's part of the Republican Party. So I want to be honest about that. It is that doesn't mean that you can't complain about Republican politicians from time to time. I
Sure.
mean, everyone in the Republican Party complains about some Republican politicians from time to time anyway. The RLC is no different from that.
Yeah. Well, and again, it's why my shirt, I cyberbully politicians. I came up with this, like the whole idea of it is because how can I encourage people to get somewhat engaged with their with candidates and their politicians? Like, be harassing them, be communicating with them, because right now we don't do that enough. They don't hear enough from their constituents, so they're making decisions. They're supposed to be making decisions based upon their constituents, but a lot of the time when they are trying to do it right, they're not hearing the feedback to be able to make those decisions.
You're right about that. And I think that that's one of the things that caucuses can amplify.
Okay.
Because the presumption isn't always true, but I believe it's true in the case of the RLC. The presumption is that if the RLC is saying something, it's because it's thought about it. It's had to at least have thought about it enough to come to a consensus of some sort. And so your voice really does get amplified. We try to do a good job of delivering the message in a professional way and at the same time with an impact.
Nice. Yeah. And
that, that's hard to do on your own.
Absolutely. It is very hard to do. And when it comes to like with the RLC in general, what do you see is going to be your biggest challenge in the first year?
The biggest challenge will be the administrative angle of making sure we have successful chapters in every state. The administration is really a challenge. You know, in no small part, it's like starting a whole new party.
Sure.
You know, you got to make sure that you're fostering a charter in every state and that it's healthy, that it's up and running, and in a position to make endorsements, because the local endorsements are done by the state chapter. The federal races are endorsed by the RLC board at the national level, but the vast majority of races are in a state, right? They're not federal. And so each chapter has a tremendous amount of potential influence, and we want to make sure that we get as many bites of the apple as possible.
I like it. Yeah, and pushing anything to be able to get liberty-minded people back into politics is important, because it seems like we're just getting more and more away from it and turning more and more towards authoritarian regimes, and you got to stop that.
Yeah, but I agree.
With the RLC, like some of the people that would be thinking about this would be like, well, it's like me like 3 years ago in politics. I would just be like, it's the same bird though. So how do you is it just growing with the chapter, or do you really target to get some big names in the political arena?
We will. Yeah, we will. And what that looks like is getting a lot of leaders on board who are leaders in their state houses.
Okay.
You know, we all know that we've got a lot of liberty-minded Republicans in places like New Hampshire because of the Free State Project, you know, things like that. But what a lot of folks don't realize is how many liberty-minded Republicans there are who identify as such from time to time, but don't have a good vehicle to make comfortable, to make viable that moniker, that label, and calling that voice a liberty-minded voice. Indiana is a great example. Our guy Dave Moskrip and Sean Smith out there are building a chapter. They're creating avenues for sitting representatives to come on in. They're developing those relationships right away as we speak. That's very important. and it's a chicken and egg. You know,
Sure,
you
I can see that.
need a certain number of bodies to come in to create a charter and to make the case that there will be a retail charter that is functioning and can add value in order to attract the candidates and the sitting congresspersons to join as well. And then you need those names in order to build out the numbers,
Yeah.
the rank and file. You know, there is
Yeah.
a stepwise sort of yin and yang that goes with that. There's a chicken, then there's an egg, and then there's a chicken, and there's an egg. So you got to spiral upward. And Indiana is just a great example because it's going gangbusters. But we need to make sure that we do that in other states as well.
Well, we'll go back and clip that part out so David's head doesn't get any bigger, because we definitely can't deal with that in society today. David's head is already big enough.
Yeah, well, that's
we need
a
to
good
dial that
point.
down.
We'll edit that out. He is doing a fantastic job there. It is. Let's just say it's mostly because of Sean. It's mostly because of Sean. David
I'll
is
go with that one.
along for the ride, but Sean is doing a great job there.
Awesome. And that's good to hear. And because I feel like we're starting to get with politics being involved in every part of our lives, even though it's never had politics involved before. And it's getting messy to where people are just like, I don't even want to hear it anymore. And so those local chapters will help keep a positive approach to making some changes and being able to get buy-in and support. And so I think that's a really good idea. Not that David's driving it, but it's a really good idea. But,
no. And as soon as we get Indiana rolling in a long-term sustainable fashion, then we can put him out to pasture and it'll be even better. It'll be even better.
Sounds even awesome.
Yeah.
One last question on RLC, and then we'll talk about that fake document real quick, and then we'll call it a show. Do you see that the RLC to expand in the blue states will be easier or harder?
I don't know. I think it'll be harder, but I don't know. Ask me in 6 months. I don't know the answer to that. I think that the answer is not pretty.
Okay.
I think the answer is that in states that are dominated by the Republican Party, you have a lot of Republicans who feel differently about certain things, and that naturally lends itself to a caucus to represent one group, maybe a caucus to represent another group. New Hampshire is an interesting example where you've got a lot of representatives who are aligned with the Free State Project. You've got some folks that call themselves libertarians. You've got some more traditionally identifying Republicans. It's a little bit splintered, but it's a state that's very dominated by Republicans, and so it can be, right? The big debates in that state go on inside of the Republican Party, not between Republicans and Democrats. And so that's a place where I think the RLC is going to do well.
Okay.
In a bluer state,
looks like you cut out again real quick. So curious to hear this answer, guys, because I was thinking of like California and what California would be like. You think that you would get a lot of people. Oh, you're going to come back. You're going to get pulled off again. Watch, it's going to do it. And then I'll add you back in here. I'm just waiting for it to end up removing you like it has before. There we go. Just like clockwork. There we go. Now we have you back. It's all good.
Yeah, and I think what you said is right. In a state where you don't have as many Republicans, those Republicans that you do have to stay more tightly bound.
Sure.
You know, their natural alignment is going to be anti-Democrat.
Yeah.
As opposed to having a big debate inside of the Republican caucus getting split up by multiple sub-caucuses. So I'm just guessing that it'll be easier for things to take off in red dominated states.
Okay. Well, I'm
By
also
the way, if I can just add,
yeah,
this is why it's so important to join the Republican Party right now, nationally speaking, because the big debate that's going to happen over the next 3 years and probably over the next 7 is going to be inside the Republican Party.
Oh, absolutely. I could see that. Yeah.
I am rooting for the Democratic Party. I have friends and tons of family in the Democratic Party. I'm hoping that it extracts its collective head from its derriere.
Oh, yeah.
But I see no sign that it will.
No.
And it breaks my heart because the rank and file Democrat is so much smarter than the typical Democratic Party politician. It breaks my heart. I do not believe the Democratic Party politicians are doing a good job of representing either the interests of its membership or even the politics of its membership. That's a weird statement.
Yeah.
I don't believe that the typical Democratic Party member, just the, everyday American who identifies as a Democrat, I don't believe those people buy into the idea that every Democratic politician does, which is the way to conduct politics is to figure out what group you're in, what demographic you're in.
Exactly.
And then kowtow to that group.
No.
It's so moronic. It is so insulting. It is so un-American and so ineffective. And yet, there are Democratic politicians who, to this day, what is it, July 8th, are still doubling down on this concept. They cannot understand why they got wiped out in November. They cannot understand it.
Yep.
And that's why you need to replace those people, because they can't learn. They grew up in that system, right? They grew up thinking that. So the only way the Democratic Party can even get to the starting line in terms of engaging, in terms of providing leadership and an intellectual debate in this country, politically speaking, the only way that's going to happen is to get rid of the existing politicians. And that takes a lot of time.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, I was screaming this during the whole election for 2024 up to the actual election day, is the Democrats, everybody should be enraged. They chose for you who your candidate was. You should be upset. You should be screaming from the rooftops, and no one was. I was like, how is this even real? You guys, are you even paying attention to what's going on? You were served a candidate and said, this is what you get no matter what. Like, holy cow.
Horrible. And I gotta say, of all the weird things I'll say this week, this will probably be the weirdest. Kamala Harris deserved better than for Joe Biden to say she was picked because she was a black female. You follow me? Even if it's the truth, and I believe him, I believe, Joe Biden is the consummate liar. I get that. But I believe him when he says she was chosen because she's a black female. I'm
100%.
No doubt. Okay. You might think that someone who had been a politician for as long as Joe would have the smarts to keep his mouth shut about that fact.
Right.
Now, it's one thing to say in February of 2020, when you're campaigning in South Carolina, we're going to have a black VP.
Sure.
I get that. We all say stupid things from time to time. That's the kind of stupid thing that Joe would say. Almost can't help himself.
Yep.
But after that primary is done, you've got to shut your pie hole. But it's true. It's true.
Yes. I'm laughing because it's just funny.
If you want to appoint Kamala Harris for that reason, or for any other, maybe you thought she was the cat's meow.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever, you knock yourself out. You hire her, she's going to be your VP, double down, super, I get it, high fives. You cannot undermine her by telling the world that she was chosen because she's a black female.
Right.
It's like politics 101.
Well, I think it shows that the Democrat Party picked Joe Biden because of the auto pen and because it gives somebody else the power, and he has no ability to say no. So that's
well, literally, not metaphorically. I think he literally probably had no ability to say no.
Yeah, I agree.
I think it's a very reasonable issue to wonder whether he knew what it was that he was signing.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that that's perfectly legitimate. And I don't mean to say that the people who were in charge were not better than Joe Biden being in charge. On some level, good for them for stepping in.
Sure.
I'm sure that they, in some weird way, that's an aspect of patriotism, I suppose. Not as patriotic as telling the world the truth,
Facts.
which is that he needs to be replaced.
Mm-hmm.
And that will always be a profound disappointment, to the point of, I'm not going to call it treason, but I think that you've got to recognize that that's a violation of your oath. You've got a guy who can't function. Your obligation is to avail yourself of the solutions that are in the Constitution. It's not like there isn't a constitutional way to work your way through this, and people were obliged to do so. So that's a real failing.
Agreed. And that was what I was just going to end on, is just it. We have the 25th Amendment. I thought for sure we were going to see it pulled. I thought for sure, but we never did.
Yeah.
And
you're an optimist like I am. You thought that things would work. And now I need to pull the 25th Amendment because it's my nighty-night time. Yep. And, I'm of a certain age, and, I need to go sleepy sleep.
Yeah, it's, man, I could go on about all of this stuff, but we're coming up. We're at your time here, and I appreciate you coming on, talking with me, going over the RLC. We didn't get through all of our topics, but that's okay. I think we had a very good discussion talking about what the future looks like.
You and I could be on here for 7 hours.
Yes.
And you would say the same thing at the end of it. You would be like, this was great. We didn't get to everything, but we got to most things. And so that's good.
Yep.
I think we could be on here for like 8 weeks, and you'd say, well, we didn't get to everything, but we got to most things. So that's good.
Facts.
We'll do this again. Maybe we could do it in the spring or so. Spring or summer. I don't want to wait a whole year, but after the first of the year, let's talk. At least you and I talk offline,
sure.
Even if it's not in a pod. We don't have to have all these weird people listening to us.
Yeah,
we can talk without them.
Absolutely. Well, we'll wrap it up here, man. You want to go ahead and tell everybody where they can go and follow you, find out about the RLC, all of that?
No, it's a secret. We don't want anyone reaching out. If anyone has money to send, especially don't reach out. We can't have any of that. No, nothing. I got nothing. Look, you can go to the same website as ever, ter.maat.com. And my email address is there. There's a whole page with good stuff about the Republican Liberty Caucus. It links to the RLC.org website where you can read about the RLC. You can join the RLC. It's only $45. It's the best investment in all of politics. So that's worth it. You can go to the RLC website, or you can go to the RLC page on our website, and you can see some of the things that have been said about the RLC and learn about our project. If you would like to get involved with the project, it is a lot of fun. It's a very fun group of people. And Dave Mosgrip is on there as well. And we have a good time. It's some work. Not going to lie to you about that. It's some work, recruiting people. inviting them to become members of the RLC and explaining what it is that we're doing. It's some work. There's no getting around that, but it's fun. It's a good product to push, by the way. You know, if you're going to push a product, this is something that I really do believe in. And libertarianism, you know, let's be honest, we're pushing liberty, we're pushing libertarianism. It feels exactly the same as all the work that all of us have done to push the Libertarian Party over the years. And by the way, for those of you who remain inside the Libertarian Party, keep working your asses off also, please. Yes. I do think the LP is going to get back on its feet and do a lot of terrific work. And for those of you who remain in the Libertarian Party, keep at it. Keep to the grindstone. Yep. But if you want to try this path and help us out, I think it's got a very, very high ratio of potential to investment.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And everybody tune in, check it out, rlc.org. That's where you can follow up. Mike, thank you for having a conversation with me and going over all this stuff. It was good to get that information out. And we'll end it here.